I know I'm recording this after the Clippers and Mavs Game 1 happened, which was a great game, but I thought I had some more time. I thought I had an extra day to work with. There was also some audio issues when recording the first part of this two-part series. So as the legend Jersey Drake said, better late than never. Let's get into the X factor for every Western Conference playoff team. Let's jump right into this. Starting with the 8th seed Memphis Grizzlies, I'm going to go with Dillon Brooks. Now, Dillon Brooks has had stretches of being hot and cold, really, this entire season. I mean, the two playing games epitomized his play thus far this season. I mean, the first game against the Grizzlies, the San Antonio Spurs, he had over 20 points per game on a sane shooting, very efficient shooting, and he actually had a defensive masterclass against DeMar DeRozan. He was the reason why DeRozan really struggled in that game, and I mean, his defensive efforts on DeMar DeRozan probably kept the Memphis Grizzlies in that game and ultimately won them that game. But then if you look in his performance against the Warriors, he dropped I think 17 points per game on not great efficiency. He even fouled out. So you can see that disparity between good Dillon Brooks and bad Dillon Brooks. And if you look at the splits between Memphis and won and lost, when Memphis does well and succeeds, Dillon Brooks does well and succeeds. When they lose, he doesn't do well as well. I mean, in the games that the Memphis Grizzlies won, he averaged about 18.5 points per game on 44% shooting, 36% from three, which are solid shooting splits. They're not amazing, but they are solid enough. But then when they lose, he's averaging under 16 points per game and shooting under 40% from three and just about 32% from three, which are god-awful at that efficiency. So when he does well, or when the team does well, he seems well, but when the team loses, he seems to falter in that sense. He also will have the task of guarding the Jazz's perimeter player. I'm not sure if Taylor Jenkins will have him assigned onto Joe Ingles for the first game. I know Donovan Mitchell is expected to come back, but especially with that ankle injury, we don't know how he's going to fit into the flow of Quinn Snyder's offense. But he should be either on Donovan Mitchell or Mike Conley whenever he comes back, or he'll be on Joe Ingles. So he'll probably be guarding the best perimeter player on the Utah Jazz, and we've seen him do well. I mean, his performance against DeMar DeRozan was nothing to scoff at. It's just that he hasn't been able to put it all together consistently throughout an entire season. And so if Dillon Brooks does get hot like we saw against the San Antonio Spurs, he can easily steal a game against the Utah Jazz. So he just needs to put it all together offensively and defensively, and this is more of a series to see what can he do in the future for this Grizzlies team. Going with the 7-seeded LA Lakers, the defending champion LA Lakers, I'll go with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, KCP. Now, he's the real sole three-point specialist on this team. I mean, when you look at the Lakers starting five, he is by far the best three-point shooter, at least in terms of someone who can spot up, catch and shoot, shooting 41% from three from behind the arc, which is a career high on nearly 4.5 attempts per three. He played a pivotal role in that finals run last year. He kind of took over from Danny Green as the main sharpshooter on that team, averaging 11 points on 38% shooting from three, and he really started to pick it up in the Western Conference Finals against the Nuggets and the NBA Finals against the Heat, scoring at least double-digit points on nearly every one of those games, and he usually did it on good shooting splits. And so they're really going to need him to step up in that regard like he did in the finals run last year and provide consistent play. And even when, in the last 2 months when LeBron, Schroeder, AD were all out, that quote-unquote big three was out with their various injuries and Dennis Schroeder dealing with COVID protocols, he also stepped up in regards. He averaged 13 points per game in the month of April on 45% shooting from the field, and then 11.4 points per game on 45% shooting also, but 40% from behind the arc, and then in the month. So he has been efficient, especially in the last 2 months, and that's something you like to see, where a guy is able to step up when the better players on the team aren't able to do well, and then he can kind of go back in the usual role without losing a step. So they're really going to need him to carry on what he did in the NBA Finals, someone who can, if AD is getting double teamed, they kick it out to Dennis Schroeder, to KCP, or Anthony Davis can get one-on-one with someone because the defender's afraid of a wide-open KCP3, or LeBron does his usual classic driving kick. The guy he's going to be kicking it to is usually Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So going with the 6th-seeded Portland Trailblazers, I'm going to go with Jusuf Nurkic. Now, Nurkic, before his injury, was one of the more fun players to watch. I mean, he is a stat sheet stuffer by definition. He got a 5x5 game, I want to say 2 years ago, and he's someone who does everything well, and it's just a joy to watch him, but he hasn't really been consistent since dealing with these injuries in the 2019-2020 season, and then this year in 2021, he dealt with some injuries as well. He only averaged 11.5 points per game, which was a 4-point decrease from 2019, which was his last full regular season. He did shoot better or around the same efficiency, but obviously there's that dip of production as other guys were stepping up in place of him, a.k.a. Gary Trent and now Norman Powell on the team. And this is going to be an interesting series to watch out for because of the Denver Nuggets' lack of perimeter depth. You know, they don't have Jamal Murray due to the torn ACL. Will Barton hasn't come back. So if, Jusuf Nurkic defensively, and he has been a solid defender when he's healthy, if he can, at least make Nikola Jokic's life a bit more challenging, I think that could potentially swing the series in favor of the Portland Trailblazers because you know what you're going to get from CJ, Dame, and Norman Powell. They've been consistent throughout this entire regular season. It's just a matter of can Jusuf Nurkic do enough to prevent Nikola Jokic from going off and just making his life a bit more difficult. And if he can add some elements offensively, not only as someone who can score down low off of second chance opportunities, but also as a passer. He's one of the best passing big men in the league. And Nurkic has the advantage defensively of at least knowing Nikola Jokic because they were teammates for a couple of years back in Denver. For the 5th-seeded Dallas Mavericks, who just completed their first playoff game against the LA Clippers, I'm going to go with Kristaps Porzingis. Now, Kristaps Porzingis has been both inconsistent and has struggled to stay healthy really since he came to Dallas after suffering that ACL tear back in 2018 with the New York Knicks. I mean, if you look at his Game 1 box score, he also didn't look that well if you were by the eye test, but even by the box score, he had 14 points, 4 rebounds in 35 minutes played on 4 of 13 shooting, 1 of 5 from behind the arc. And so he's really struggled to be consistent. I mean, it has to deal with all these lower body injuries, these foot injuries. He just came off an ankle injury. And the biggest concern is obviously his health. I mean, he missed 3 of the games in the Mavs Clippers playoff series last year, and many fans say that if Kristaps did stay healthy, they could have upset the LA Clippers because when he did play, he was amazing. He averaged almost 24 points per game and 9 rebounds on 52% shooting from the field, 53% from behind the arc. So those are great stats, but he's coming in still banged up. He missed 10 of his last 14 games with an ankle injury, and that's also going to be a concern. How is he going to play? Essentially just jumping straight into playoff basketball without much time to get back into the flow of things. And we saw tonight he struggled to stay healthy. In his series against the Clippers this season, he played the Clippers twice, averaging 16.5 points and 10 rebounds on 50% shooting from the field, 36 from behind the arc. They actually were 2 games, not in a back-to-back, but 2 and 3 nights kind of a deal. So, but that was way back earlier in the season. I think it'll be interesting to see how he responds. I don't think he'll find as much success as he did back in last year's playoffs because, well, he's coming off of an injury, so he's not at 100% like he was in the bubble. And also, he's going to be going up against both Zubac and Serge Ibaka. He's not going to be going up against Montrezl Harrell, who isn't the greatest defensively, especially on the perimeter. Serge Ibaka, once he gets back into the flow of things, he'll be probably the primary defender on Kristaps Porzingis, someone who can play out on the perimeter and defend his three-point shooting, but also defend him down low. It'll be interesting to see how Kristaps can match up with Serge Ibaka, and if the Mavericks can get Kristaps Porzingis at somewhere in between his playoff level and his regular season series, let's say 20 and 7. If you get 20 and 7 from Kristaps Porzingis on good shooting splits, and you get Luka Doncic playing like he did last night, I mean, they almost did it last year, despite Kristaps Porzingis missing 3 games, and they already stole a game in LA with Kristaps Porzingis playing horrendously, essentially. So he just needs to stay healthy all year, kind of be that consistent second option Mark Cuban and Dallas management thought they were going to get when they acquired him at the 2018 trade deadline, but he really hasn't been that, as he struggled to stay on the court. And hopefully he can be that second star next to Luka Doncic, someone who can space the floor, also serve as a rim protector, and score inside. Now, going with the 4th seeded LA Clippers, I'm going to go with Paul George, playoff P, way off P, pandemic P, PG 13%. I mean, we've heard all the nicknames at this point about Paul George and his collapses in the playoffs. I mean, you had last year where he struggled in the Dallas Mavericks series and the 3-1 collapse against the Denver Nuggets. You had the 2019 playoffs where Damian Lillard waved him goodbye in Game 5. And in 2018, he struggled in the Utah Jazz series. And so we know how good Paul George can be in the regular season. It's just a matter of putting it all together in the playoffs. I mean, Paul George is probably the biggest X factor out of any player in these playoffs, maybe outside of Ben Simmons, because we know what he can do we know what he can do in the regular season. He's a guy who can score at all 3 levels at good efficiency. He's a good defensive player, but for some reason, once the playoffs come in, he just collapses. And he made the comment saying, "Oh, I'm back to MVP form," and he did play. I wouldn't say at an MVP level, but he played at a good enough level. He averaged almost 24 points per game, shooting a career high from the field at 46.5%, or 46.7% more specifically, and from behind the arc, shooting 41.1% on nearly 8 attempts a game. And he had his career high in assists, serving as the playmaker for this team when Patrick Beverley was missing time, and then they brought in Rondo. But even still, Paul George was averaging more than 5 assists per game, including 7 assists per game in the last 2 months. So he's found a new role within the team as more of a ball handler, not playing off the ball like he did with Doc Rivers. He's playing more on the ball. He's being a playmaker. He's going more in isolation. But we know how good he can be. It's just that once playoff time comes around, it's just that he can't play well. I mean, if you look at his stats against the Dallas Mavericks, he dropped 23, 6, and 5, which isn't bad on 8-18 shooting. But if you saw the first half, I think he only had 1 basket made. He started the game 0 for 7. So it's just like, if he was consistent throughout this entire game, the LA Clippers are probably up in this series 1-0. And he even was terrible in their last series against Dallas as well. I mean, they won despite him averaging 18.5 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists on 36% shooting and 27% from behind the arc. So maybe get him more involved in the ISO game. Take advantage of a Luka Doncic switch on a screen. Try attacking someone like Maxi Kleber. I mean, Kristaps Porzingis, I know he's a good rim protector, but he is still coming off of an injury. And maybe if he's not getting involved as a scorer, get him involved as a passer. So it'll be interesting. I mean, if history's telling us anything, is that Paul George will struggle in these playoffs. But if you can get close to regular season level Paul George, I don't see why this team can't at least make the Western Conference Finals, if not the NBA Finals. Going to my 3-seeded Denver Nuggets, I'm going to go with Austin Rivers. Now, Austin Rivers actually recently joined this team, joined the Denver Nuggets back on April 31st as a move to replace the injured Jamal Murray, who tore his ACL, and so he'll be providing both perimeter depth and veteran presence for this team. Also with the loss of Will Barton, who is still battling his own injury. But in the limited time he's played with the Nuggets, he's averaging nearly 9 points per game, shooting 42% from the field and 37% from behind the arc on 5 attempts. This Nuggets team, with the loss of Will Barton Will Barton being out for at least right now and Jamal Murray out for the playoffs, they don't have that combo guard who can, kind of score in isolation shoot. Monte Morris and Facundo Campazzo aren't that. Monte Morris is more of a playmaker who can set up other teammates, and Facundo Campazzo is someone who kind of works in the same vein, but also is more of an off-ball shooter. But they don't have that guy who they can say, hey, give you a perimeter guy that you can be like, hey, give you the ball, do what you need to do, and get us a basket. And I'm not saying Austin Rivers is an amazing combo guard, but he is a combo guard on that roster, and especially when, let's say, Nikola Jokic is out for those 3 to 4 minutes, you kind of need someone who can kind of run the offense a bit while he's off the bench. And Austin Rivers, despite what the reputation he may or may not have, he he is a veteran presence. He does have some playoff pedigree, so he does have that experience under his belt. And so if he can just, contain the force while Nikola Jokic is out and provide a bit of scoring while not being a total liability on defense, I think he's going to be huge, especially in the absence of Jamal Murray and Will Barton. Going with the second-seeded Phoenix Suns, I'm going to go with Deandre Ayton. Deandre Ayton is a player that if he had the mentality of a Joel Embiid, the Phoenix Suns would easily be the favorites that come out of the West. I mean, he has the size and the physical tools to be a dominant player, but for some reason he isn't. I mean, he kind of works in the same vein as Ben Simmons, at least in terms of his attitude. I feel like he plays the game very not lackadaisically as Ben Simmons, but he just seems to defer a lot more to his teammates. I mean, he averaged just 10 shot attempts per game, and being a third option and being a former number 1 draft pick, I feel like that isn't enough, but the Suns did get the second seed, and he's going to have a very tough matchup against Anthony Davis round 1, which is unfortunate, especially for the Suns team. I feel like this is a Western Conference Finals team, and they might get bounced in the first round. He's going to have a tough matchup both offensively, scoring against Anthony Davis. He does, have the benefit that Anthony Davis isn't 100%, so attacking him won't be as hard as it was, let's say, in the bubble. But defensively, he's also getting his hands full. He has the physical tools, but instinctively he's still not there. And Anthony Davis is a hell of a matchup to go up against round 1 if you're DeAndre Ayton. Now, if we look at his regular season stats, he averaged just under 16.5 points per game and 6.5 rebounds on 67% shooting. I'm sorry, this was his stats against the LA Lakers. So, that's solid for what he needs to do. I think if he takes a bit more shots, I think he can work out success. But it should be noted that Anthony Davis only played in one of those games. He dropped 42, 12, and 5, and the Lakers won without Dennis Schroeder or LeBron James. So it'll be interesting to see how DeAndre can combat that in the first round. And if they can get a good DeAndre Ayton with the way Devin Booker's been playing and the way Chris Paul's been playing, the sky's the limit for this Phoenix Suns team. And I said this even before the playoffs began. If DeAndre Ayton had a more aggressive mentality, this team would easily be a finals, competing for a Western Conference Finals, if not going to the NBA Finals. But he just needs to take a step up, get more locked in offensively and defensively. He's going to have a tough time, but I think he has the talent to at least fare well against Anthony Davis. And finally, for the number 1 seeded Utah Jazz, I'm going to go with Joe Ingles, Jingle. We know Donovan Mitchell will be cleared for tomorrow's game against the Memphis Grizzlies, but we still don't know the situation of Mike Conley. And even with Donovan Mitchell playing, he still hasn't played a game in, I believe, in over a month, I believe. So it's not like he's going to be at 100%, and he's going to be diving into playoff basketball. And Joe Ingles, ever since Conley and Mitchell went out, he was tasked with being the main playmaker on this team. He averaged 7 assists in the month of May because of the loss of those 2 guards, and he's really had to step up and become essentially the point guard for this Jazz team. He's also averaging career highs in points per game, 3-point percentage at 45%, and field goal percentage at 49%. So he's been very efficient, and Joe Ingles, I think, has been one of the best role players, maybe not even for this season, but for the last few seasons for this Utah Jazz team, serving as a secondary playmaker, someone who can shoot the ball well and shoot at an efficient level. But especially with the current circumstances of this Utah Jazz team, he's going to need to take a step up. I don't think it'll necessarily hurt them against the Memphis Grizzlies, but if they play either the Clippers or the Mavericks, if Donovan Mitchell is struggling to get out to the gate and Mike Conley still isn't back, Joe Ingles is really going to need to take a jump up offensively and at least help out a bit, fill out the void that is lost by those 2 guards. So that'll do it for this episode of the Western Conference X Factors. I'll go over the list once again. For the 8th seed of Memphis Grizzlies is Dillon Brooks. For the 7th seed of LA Lakers is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. For the 6th seeded Portland Trailblazers is Jusuf Nurkic. For the 5th seeded Dallas Mavericks is Kristaps Porzingis. For the 4th seeded LA Clippers is Paul George. For the 3rd seeded Denver Nuggets is Austin Rivers. For the 2nd seeded Suns is DeAndre Ayton. And for the 1 seeded Utah Jazz, it is Joe Ingles. Thank you guys for listening. I'll be back with another video shortly, and I'm out. Peace.